Hello, welcome to this Halloween ArtCAM Express 2013 demonstration. If you take a look on the screen, this is what I'm going to be producing, a sign within ArtCAM Express, quite a fun sign, just saying Happy Halloween, and it's got this quite cool texture on here. I'm going to be showing you how you can create and machine this using the basic ArtCAM Express with no modules. So if I just go to File and Close Model, I'm not going to save the changes, and if you take a look on the far right hand side of the screen, you can see all the available modules for ArtCAM Express, and you can see that I have none of these installed. If I did have them installed, I would have a green arrow next to them. So everything that you're going to see is done using the basic ArtCAM Express. Right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is to open up my folder that I have here for my ArtCAM Halloween Express demonstration, and I'm just going to drag and drop this pumpkin's image into ArtCAM. Just going to change the default height in Z to 0, and I'm going to OK that. Now if I just zoom in on this, you can see that it's quite a bad image. It's really pixelated and the colours don't look the best, to be completely honest with you. Now what I want to do with this is just create some vectors really quickly, and I can do that within ArtCAM Express by using the bitmap to vector tool. So if I select bitmap to vector tool, this opens up the dialog box, and basically what I need to do is to reduce all of the colours for this image basically down to one colour that ArtCAM can trace around. So ArtCAM actually traces around one colour. So if I were to create the vectors now and then drop the contrast slider bar down so I can see, you can see it's giving me some really bad vectors and it's not giving me all of the detail. So what I need to do is drop this down so then ArtCAM can trace around the one colour. Now to do that, if I select reduce colours, you can see, let me just move that out of the way. At the moment it's reduced that down to 32 colours. So even though this is just a black and a white image, there are lots of different shades of greys, blacks and whites in there. So if I bring that right the way down, you'll notice that the colours wash out in the colour palette down the bottom and also within the image. So if I just start bringing that right the way down, and I'll just bring it straight the way down to 2 colours, and then I can OK that. Now if I just zoom in on this, you can see that this is really badly pixelated, and I'm not going to be too worried about that because the bitmap to vector tool doesn't follow all of this pixelation. So if I create the vectors now and drop the contrast slider bar down, let's just zoom in on the top here. You can see that it's not following all of this jaggedness. It's giving me a smooth polyline or line going around the colour. Now the speckle size and the smoothness, I'll just explain to you what those mean quickly. The speckle size is basically a tolerance. So because at the moment this is set to 2 pixels, anything 2 or over will not create a vector. So here you can see that I have 2 pixels here and it's not creating a vector around there. If I were to set that to 1 for the speckle size, it would create a vector around this portion here. The smoothness is a percentage, so 1 is going to give me rigid or straight lines, up to 100, which is going to give me more curvy lines. So I can now close the bitmap to vector tool down, and you can see that I've got all of my vectors. Now if I was using the vector tools module, what I could do is to assign all of these vectors to a new layer, but because I don't have that, what I'm going to do is export all of the vectors out and then I'm going to bring them back in later. So if I go to vectors and export, now you can see that we can export as EPS or DXF files. I'm going to choose a DXF file and let's call this pumpkin and select save. This is just asking me for a tolerance. I'm just going to accept the default tolerance, and there you can see I've saved all of these vectors and I don't need to keep them anymore. So what I can do is to now go to File and New Model, and I'm going to set up the size of my actual model now. So let's do this 600mm by 400mm in height, and let's give it a thickness of 15mm. I'm going to be working in millimeters, so if I wanted to I could change that to inches. I could also change the origin by selecting one of the four corners or the center to change the origin or the datum. So let's put that bottom left, and the material Z0, I'm going to put that at the top of the block, and the model position in material at the top of the block. I'm not going to save the changes. Okay, so that's opened up my new model, and at the moment I'm on the 2D view. I can also switch to the 3D view, which gives me a 3D view of this, and you'll notice that I have this blue area underneath here. That's actually the material block. So what I'm going to do is just toggle that off by selecting the material block visibility. So that just turns that off, and I'm just going to take a plan view of this, because the first thing that I'm going to do is bring in a piece of clip art which has already been generated. So if I go to Relief Clip Art Library, in here there are well over 500 pieces of clip art for you to use. Now you can see here this is just a temporary folder that I've been using for my demos. Let's say here are all of the libraries that are available. I have a few extra ones in there, just work that I've done in the past. So for instance, animals, I know that that's a standard directory. So you have all of these files that you can use for your pieces within ArtCAM Express. Let's change to crests. So you can see all of these crests here. We also have greenery. So you can see all of these flowers, leaves for instance. So all of these are included with the base ArtCAM Express product. You don't need to purchase anything else for this. So what I'm going to do is to come down to bases. So we have lots of sign bases in here, and I'm going to choose this sign base 16, and I'm just going to grab that and drag it into the view, and you can see straight away I can manipulate that. So let's just close the Relief Clip Art Library for the time being, and I'm going to center that. Now if I press Alt on the keyboard, it will move or resize everything from the center point. So I'm going to press Alt on the keyboard and I'm going to move that out, and then I'm going to snap to the edge of the model. And I'm going to do the same for the top, snap to the edge of the model. So I know that that width and height is 600 by 400. Now if I rotate that around and just zoom in, you can see the height of the actual piece of clip art. Now I want to change the height of this. I want it to be 17mm. Now I'll explain why I'm doing it at 17mm in a little while. So if I select apply, and what I need to do is go to the Relief Clip Art Paste options. And I need to make sure that I've got Paste Outline Vector selected, because this is going to paste a vector around the outline of this, and I'm going to be using this outline as a boundary and also to design with. So if I just paste this down now, and if I go to the 2D view, you can see that it's created my vector there. Within the 3D view, you can see that it's pasted that sign base down for me. Now if I take a plan view of that, what I'm going to do now is to import an image but what I'm going to do is import it and straight away create a piece of floating clip art, and it's going to be a texture because I want a bit of texture on the inside of this sign. Now the way that I can do that is to go to reliefs and select import, and I'm going to come down to my folder Halloween Express, and I've got this Bark 01 image in there. And I'm just going to open this up. Just take a few seconds because this is an extremely large image. You'll see when this opens up how large it actually is. So if I zoom out, you can see it's really large, and what I'm going to do is just resize this. Now I can toggle this padlock on here to maintain an aspect ratio if I wanted to, like so, but I can't actually lock it onto the top right hand corner of my model. So I'm going to turn that off, and then I'm going to select that, and I'm just going to snap to the top right corner of the model. Now let's just change the Z range to a standard size, 1mm. Now because under the paste combine mode I have this set to merge high, if I were to paste this down now, I would pretty much get exactly what I can see on the screen. Because it's only 1mm high, it wouldn't create a texture over the top of the sign base. It would basically lie underneath the relief that's already there. So what I need to do is select add, and this will add the material or the texture onto the top of the sign. So if I select paste now, you can see that that's added the texture onto the top of the sign base. So if I just rotate around, you can see how that looks. Now I'm not bothered about the texture being on the outside or on the top of this border here. I'm going to completely get rid of the texture there in a little while when we do some machining. So what I'm going to do now is to bring in the vectors that I created earlier, and what I'm going to do is do this in the 2D view. Now you can see that I'm not too sure what's going on in the 3D view when I'm in the 2D view, and I can't see where the relief actually is. If I select this button here, it will preview the relief within the 2D view, and I can adjust its transparency also, so that's quite useful. So I'm going to go to vectors and to import, and I'm going to import my pumpkin DXF file. I'm just going to accept the default sizes, and I'm going to center that and transform that. I'm going to change the size of this, so just press Alt on the keyboard. I'm going to bring it up to around about 250mm, and we're just going to bring that up to, let's say, around about there. Okay, so that's my pumpkin vectors in the correct position. And what I'm going to do now is to create an arc. So I'm going to snap on that point, snap on that point, and then I just want this to hover over the top of these half rounds on the side, like so. Basically what I'm going to use this for is to wrap some text around, so it's on an arc. If I select here to create text, what this will do, it will look within my Windows fonts folder, and I can select any text that I have within there. So you can see all of this text is located within my Windows fonts folder. Now I have a font that I'd like to use called Darkwood, which is there. So it's quite spooky and ideal for this Halloween piece. You can change the character percentage, the spacing. Don't really want to do that just for this, so I'm just going to type in Happy Halloween and select Done. Now you'll notice that when I've selected that, I've got a few red places and I've got a few points here, just indicating that there are a few errors. Now what I'm going to do is sort those out in a little while. This is where the font creator or the font editor comes in handy, which is a module for ArtCAM Express. Basically, I know on the P that I have a problem. If I just zoom in, you can see I've got this piece here, and I'm not too sure what that actually is. Obviously the graphic designer who created this font wasn't too bothered about the actual accuracy of this and was just bothered about how it looked. But that's not good enough for what we want to do, because we want to machine this. So ArtCAM's not going to let me machine this with this overlapping the outside. It's not going to know what to machine. Now with the font creator or the font editor, what you could do would be, if you use this font over and over again, would be to edit this P and then save it within the font editor. And then every time that you use this P from this font, it would be correct. If you didn't do that, then what you would need to do would be to edit the P every time that you used it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to edit both of the P's, but just a consideration in the future, if you ever were using the same fonts and you had an error every time with that particular font because it was not drawn accurately enough. Right, so what I'm going to do is to select the text and shift select the arc, and I'm going to, from this pull out menu, select text on a curve. So what we can do is move that around, and you can see that I can create my text on a curve. Now you can change the position of this. You can go above line, base line, center, below line if you wished. I'm just going to use specify, and let's do it, let's say 25mm. Now that looks okay to me. I can change the spacing of that if I wanted to. Let's say like so. Just need to make sure that this P here is not touching the end of the H. And when I'm happy with that, I can change the positioning of the whole sentence, single words. So maybe let's move the Halloween round a touch. I can also move single letters. So let's move the Y background. Let's move the P over. Maybe the A. Like so. And when I'm happy with that, I can just select OK. And then I can delete the arc. Now, I'm going to sort out the P's. So if I select the text, right click, and I'm going to ungroup all. Now if I just zoom in, you can see I've got this piece here. I'm just going to delete that. I've got another piece just here, going to delete that. And also on the W, I've got two pieces that overlap like so. So what I'm going to do is just grab that piece and move that out so it's not overlapping. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is create some copies of the bats. So let's go up to this bat at the top, this large bat, and I'm going to select all of that, shift select the two pieces that I don't want, and I'm going to press here to group that, and then I'm just going to create a copy of that, let's say about there. I'm going to do the same with this bat here, and I'm going to group that, and let's create a copy of that here, and then I'm going to create another copy of that, but this time I'm going to transform that, so I'm going to rotate it and make it smaller. Let's say like so. Okay, so with those new bats, I'm going to select them and I'm going to mirror the objects, and I'm going to do this across the model, and I'm going to copy the original objects. So there you can see I've copied all of those. So now I'm just going to select all of those and I'm going to group them all together, so then it's easier to select later on when I want to machine them. Right, now what I'm going to do is to offset this outside edge, because I need to create a few more instances of this to use for machining purposes. So the way that I'm going to do that is to select offset vectors, and I'm going to do this either inwards or outwards, it doesn't really matter, and I'm not going to delete the original vectors. Now instead of using an offset distance, what you can do with ArtCAM 2013 is just select the line and you can just give you a real-time offset. So let's just move that to there, and let's move this one outside. Now basically the two vectors that I've just created are going to act as a boundary to mill all of the top of the border off, so I can get rid of that texture that's on the top of the border. And I'm just going to bring the original one in just so it acts as a center line, just to create a little decorative effect on this. So with all of those vectors complete, what I can do now is to go on to the machining. So if I go back to the 3D view, and you can see it's quite hard to see some of the vectors here, that's why I was doing this within the 2D view. But what I'm going to do is select toolpaths, and the first thing that I'm going to do is to create a machine relief toolpath. So this is a 3D toolpath. So this is going to basically run the tool over the top of this texture. Now all that this is telling me is that the actual model is larger than the 15mm that I set up to begin with. Now this should be more like about 18mm. So here you can see it's more or less 18mm. So I'm just going to accept this, but my material in the end is going to be 15mm or 16mm, because I'm going to machine the top of this. So the area to machine, so basically I can do this over the whole relief, or I can set up a boundary, and I'm going to do this within the selected vector. So the vector that I created when I pasted the sign base down, which was the outside of this, is going to act as a boundary, because it would be a complete waste of time to machine the outside of this. I don't need to do that. So for the finishing options, I'm going to use a 3mm ball nose tool, and the roughing options I'm going to use a 12mm end mill. Now if I select on this arrow here, this opens up a drop down where I can change my speeds and feeds, and I can also change the step down in Z. So I'm going to change that to 3mm, and I'm going to select calculate now. So this is going to calculate the roughing toolpath first, and then it's going to calculate the finishing toolpath. And this is going to give me all of my texture. So I can close that now. Now as you can see, I just have all of this red toolpath on here. If I didn't want to see this, what I can do is to open that up. Let's say for instance I just wanted to see the roughing toolpath. What I can do is select the light bulb next to the finishing, and that will just show me the roughing toolpath. If I didn't want to see the roughing toolpath, I could turn that off, turn on the finishing if I wanted to see that. So all of this is shown by the light bulbs on the right hand side of the toolpaths. Now if I right click on the machine relief and select simulate toolpath, this will give me a simulation of what's actually going to be machined on my machine. So here you can see a roughing toolpath that's just been calculated, and now it's going through the finishing toolpath. So there you can see all of the texture. What I'm going to do now is to machine off the top of the border because I don't want to have a texture on there. So to do this, what I'm going to do is turn on the vectors, and I'm going to select the very outside vector and this inside vector here. And what I'm going to do with this is to create an area clearance toolpath. Now the start depth is going to be 0. The finish depth, I'm going to do this 2mm deep, and I'm just going to use my 12mm end mill, and I'm just going to click calculate now. Now if I zoom in on this, you can see the red toolpath. Basically what's happening here is that it's coming across in X, stepping over in Y, and then coming back across in X. Now this is probably not the most efficient way to actually do this because it would take quite a long time. I'd probably be better off using a different tool clearance strategy. So I'm going to use offset. Basically what this is going to do is offset the vectors and then follow the same flow line going round. So you can see this gives me a much quicker toolpath really, and it's a lot more efficient. So now what I can do is close that, and I'm going to just simulate the area clearance, and you'll see that this has now removed all of the texture on the top of that border. So what I can do now is to create some V-bit carving. So I'm going to create V-bit carving on all of the inside. So I'm going to do that using the create V-bit carving toolpath. And the start depth, if I just hover over the piece, take a look down the bottom right hand side where I've got XYZ coordinates, you can see it gives me an X, Y, and more importantly the Z coordinate. And you can see it's around about -9mm, so let's set the start depth to 9mm. Now if I didn't do this, basically the tool would just be cutting fresh air because I've already machined all of that material away. So the carving tool, I'm going to choose a small 6mm V-bit, and if I wanted to see the actual depth that this was going to get in between the vectors, if I select refresh, you can see it's going to go down 6mm, and I'm just going to click calculate now. So with that toolpath selected, I'm just going to turn these off using the light bulbs, and I'm going to simulate the V-bit carving. So if I simulate that toolpath, this should give me a really nice bit of V-bit carving for all of this detail and make the sign really stand out. Okay, so there you can see all of the V-bit carving for this. It's starting to look really nice now. I'm going to do some more V-bit carving now, but I'm going to do this a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is select this center vector here, and instead of doing V-bit carving, because I want to follow this line with the V-bit tool, what I'm going to do is use a create profile toolpath this time, so a profile toolpath. And instead of the outside, which is the default, so it assumes that you want to cut the part out, I'm going to go along the vector. Now the start depth is going to be 2mm because I've blasted away 2mm off the top of this. The finish depth, I'm going to do that 3mm, so it's going to go 1mm deep. The profiling tool, I'm going to use my same V-bit, and I'm going to select calculate now. If I simulate this, it will create this groove around the center, and then finally all that I need to do is to cut the part out. So if I select my outside vector here, again create a profile, but this time I do wish to use the outside. The finish depth is already there because my material's set up, and the profiling tool, let's use my 12mm end mill. Select calculate now, and then I can simulate this toolpath. So there you can see it's cut the part out. Now if I want to get rid of these pieces on the outside, I can select simulation and then select delete waste material. Now I can auto delete waste material, but I know that ArtCAM won't delete these little pieces here because these are islands and ArtCAM doesn't know whether these are waste. You might want this to be in there. So what I'm going to do is select keep pick material. So I'm going to select the material that I want to keep, which is that, and it will get rid of everything else. Now what I can do is add a material onto this. So let's go down through all the materials and I'm going to choose teak and apply, and there you can see my finished Halloween plaque or sign. Now if I wanted to send this to my machine for machining, all I need to do is to select toolpaths and then select save toolpaths. Here you can see all of the toolpaths to save on the right hand side of the screen. If I didn't want to save one of these or all of them, I could just move them over using the arrows here, or I can just drag and drop it over to the left hand side and it won't be sent, or it won't be converted to the G code for the machine. Just move that back. What I'm going to do is click save toolpaths to separate files. Now if you only have a single head machine, this is what you would need to do, save all the toolpaths to separate files. If you had the tool changer, you could make sure that they all correspond to the correct tool number, and then you could just do them all in one go. But if you have a single headed machine, you need to save each toolpath individually to send to the machine, obviously to change the tool. You can also select to append toolpath details to the file names. So what this does, it tells you, it adds to the file names, profile 1 for instance, end mill 12mm, so you know exactly what file that actually is. Now if I select here, you can see all of the post processors, or the converters basically, that's what they are called, post processors, that will change all of these toolpaths into code that your machine will understand. So there are well over 200 posts within here, and they're all available within all the versions of ArtCAM, even the basic version of ArtCAM Express. What I'm going to do is just use the generic G code post here and select save. And this will save all of the toolpaths to individual files ready for me to be sent to my machine. So if I open up my folder, you can see I have all of these Halloween toolpaths. It tells me what they are and what tool it's using. So if I go to the profile small v bit, open that up, and you can see all of the G code, and this is all ready to be sent to my machine. So that brings an end to this demonstration. I hope that you found it useful, and thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.